Okay, welcome back to the video. If you're rejoining me from a couple of parts ago, in the last video I coasted out toward Jupiter, got through the long time acceleration phase, and I'm currently, looks like I'm a little bit less than 70 days away from Jupiter. Just taking a moment to collect my thoughts. It's actually been a couple of days since I recorded the last part. So basically, we're now at 0.28 as far as the gravitational influence of Jupiter goes. So we are not too terribly far away. And the goal here is to get out to Jupiter. And I want to establish an orbit around Jupiter at roughly 1 million kilometers, I believe. By doing it that way, I'll be able to minimize the amount of fuel that I'm going to use to get in orbit. And then from there, I'm going to rendezvous with Europa. I think that will be, I think it'll be better than what I did before. Whether or not it's the best way to do it remains to be determined, but at the very least, it'll be better than what I did before. So let me go ahead and get started here. You can see here the fuel. This is really nice. We're, got a lot of fuel. Let's see how we're doing on locks. Still got 126 days worth of locks, and that's good because we're only 70 days out, so we've got plenty of locks. All right. Let me see here if I planned on doing, I think I was planning on doing a Midcourse Correction. That's when I ended the last video. Again, it's been a couple days since I recorded that one, so I'm just having to go through here and remind myself where I'm at. See, I've still got the HUD showing orbit Mars, so let me update that to Jupiter. Yeah, the minimum altitude was starting to come down. Okay, yeah, I pretty well remember what's going on now. Alright, so I'm going to do a little bit of a mid-course correction here. I want to see if I can get a little bit closer to an equatorial plane around Jupiter, because according to Orbit MFD, and now having the frame set correctly to equatorial, I can see that the inclination of Europa around the equatorial plane of Jupiter is 0.48. So let's go ahead and start setting up a TransX maneuver here. Turn maneuver mode on, and we'll go through the date first. We'll bump it forward by about 50 by adding 50 to this number. That gives me about 7 minutes, which is usually enough. So if I make this about 6:3, actually it'll be about 6:411. It doesn't have to be exact, but just that's the basic idea. Right about there, that's about 7 minutes from now. So now we just go through the variables and start figuring out what does what. Let's start with plane change. Okay, that's not helping. Let's bring in the inclination in the other direction. So let's try minus. That's not helping either. So let's just reset the plane change and forget about that one for now. And let's go prograde. Okay, that's taking the minimum altitude up. That's what we want. But that's going to come at a cost at, we're looking at least 400 delta V, and then we're not even at our target yet, so I'm thinking that's a little expensive. Let's find out. Let's try outward. Yeah, you can see by using outward, here we're at 61 delta V, and we're already getting much closer to our target minimum altitude. So in this case, outward is a much better deal. And that's pretty good right there. We'll just go with that. It's really close to the target. Now let me tinker with plane chains just a little bit. See if there's anything else we can get out of it. That's not helping in the slightest. And neither is that. So we are still set on the plane. Okay, let's bring up target. Wow, that's weird. Let's try that again. That is strange. Okay, let's look at target on this side. Huh, weird. Oh, there we go. Strange things happen from time to time. Interesting. Okay, well I guess we've got to leave target on both sides in order to see it correctly. It's a new one.
Translation. Rotation.
Okay, we've got that green X pretty well lined up. So now I'm going to warp time ahead to get through this last 200 seconds. And we're just about there. Just about there. Let's recenter the green X.
Translation.
And we will go with that. Alright, maneuver mode off. Let's look at the encounter view, showing that our minimum altitude is about 1,000, or rather 1 million kilometers or 1 gigameters. Go ahead and set that MFD off to the side for a moment.
Rotation.
Rotate prograde to Jupiter. So maybe we can start to see it. And I can still feel quite a bit of mass in this vessel when I use the rotation thrusters. It's very slow to respond. Wish I had a foot pedal mute button so that every time my throat bothers me I could just push the mute button with my foot, because my hands are usually too occupied to reach down and get the mute button. Hopefully that doesn't irritate you guys too much. I do apologize for all of my throat problems. I have cystic fibrosis. I don't know if I've mentioned that in my videos before, but that's why I have so many of these throat and lung problems. At any rate, let's warp time forward. And I think really what we're looking for here is just going to be to get all the way to Jupiter at this point. I don't really think there's much more in the way to do with mid-course corrections and maneuvering, other than just making sure that we stay basically on target with our current, with our current setup. Like right now, we've got the encounter view showing that we're at about 1 million kilometers. That's what we want. I'd like to bring the inclination down a little more if I can, but it's really quite close now, so I'm not terribly worried about it. So the next major thing that we're going to do is just the orbit circularization burn when we get out to Jupiter's periapsis. So let me just go to 100,000 because we still have about 60 days maybe. And I don't know how well that shows up in the playback, but you can see the moons of Jupiter going around there. And it's also interesting, you can tell that we're pretty well in plane, because relative to our position, the moons are basically, level with the wings. If we were... And you can also see the bands around Jupiter, level. So, alright, let's back off here for a moment and see where we're at. We are now at 0.86 in terms of the gravitational pull of Jupiter. Minimum altitude's gone up a little bit. I'm actually okay with that, as long as we stay roughly around 1 million. I even thought about going to 1.5 million, so if it's actually going up a little bit, I don't have a problem with that. I just don't want it to go down. The higher it is, the less fuel we'll use to get in orbit around Jupiter. So going up isn't a concern, going down is a concern. Let's see if we can go ahead now, maybe, and get a little bit of a inclination change. I can bring up a line plane. Jupiter's already referenced, so I can now target Europa, and just to get an idea if we're at one of the nodes or not, and it says we are. So let's see if we can do this. Alright, we are already...
Translation. Rotation.
basically prograde to Jupiter.
Translation.
So let's try some translation first. Looks to me like that's actually not helping if I go the other way. Now, oddly, I don't quite understand this. According to TransX, the inclination is getting better if I go this way, but according to the line plan, it's getting worse. Now, my guess is that has to do with the fact that this one is showing the ecliptic. That's a little odd. I'm going to trust TransX though. So we're going to go minus. Actually, I take that back. I know why they're different. Because here, I'm just looking at my inclination around Jupiter's equator, whereas over here, I'm looking at my inclination around Jupiter relative to Europa, and that's actually what I want. So this is actually accurate. Because over here, I'm not actually targeting the moon yet. This is just Jupiter. Okay, we've used up another fuel module, so I'll jettison that here in a moment. Okay, I believe that was a pretty minimal fuel expenditure, about as low as that's going to get. So according to Align Plane, we're now really close to being in alignment with Europa. So whenever we do our rendezvous, it shouldn't really have any fuel expenditure in terms of getting in plane. That part should be done. Let's go ahead and jettison that the fuel payload that we just used. That is one thing I also did during the time acceleration out to Jupiter. While I was burning through LOX modules, I got rid of them. That way it lightens the vessel a little bit. So let's turn the APU on. Open the bay door. Let me accelerate time to speed that up because it takes a while. It's open. Let's turn off the APU to get rid of some noise. Now I'll bring the payload camera up. And what I'm looking for here is to see which module just expired. So let me go, probably one of these down here. Yeah, it was number 15. Just for the benefit of the people that didn't watch the time acceleration phase, if you click on these payload modules, if you look here really closely, which is probably hard to see in the video playback because the text is so small, but the number here you can see is 17,000 kilograms. That's the weight of a fuel tank when it's full. Whereas you see this one here has a mass of 15,916, so this one is mostly full, but it's got a little bit used. Whereas this one down here is 4,000 kilograms, so it's completely empty. The 4,000 is just the weight of the empty container. So we're going to deploy that one.
Payload deployed.
And you can see it floating away over here. Take a look at the external camera. And we'll actually press T to warp time ahead to a factor of 10, let that float away a little more quickly so it gets out of range of the payload doors. I believe basically these are spring-loaded or something, so when you jettison the modules, it sort of shoves them up a little bit. That's why they float away. Otherwise, we would have to use a bit of translation to push our vessel down away from the module. Fortunately, we don't have to do that. So let's go ahead now and close the doors. And we'll press T to speed up that animation. Okay, back to this view. Now, let's basically just warp time ahead until we are at periapsis. Go prograde to Jupiter so we can see better. Probably uses a little bit more RCS than is necessary to do the prograde and to do those types of maneuvers as often as I do them. I think in a real flight, you probably would want to save that RCS and not switch your views around just for the sake of switching your view around, but this is a simulator, so we have to have some suspension of reality, I suppose. Alright.
Rotation.
Pressing kill rotate just to get rid of any rotation. And now we're advancing time. We're going to get to periapsis at 57190. So that's still 14 days, 2 weeks. At 100,000, that won't take long at all. About 7 days, 6 days. Okay, let me just take a look at things here for a moment. Not sure which moon is which. I believe Io is the closest one in. I believe that is Callisto. Nope, that's Europa. That's Callisto. Okay. So that's our target moon. And warping time forward. I think what I may do here in a moment, get in a little closer, I'll set up another TransX maneuver to help me decide the best time to actually start the retrograde burn. When you're doing a retrograde burn around a planet, when you're in low orbit, it's really quite easy to know when to do it, just based on a little bit of experience, because you know, if you're around Earth, for example, and let's say your apoapsis is 200 kilometers and your periapsis is, let's say, 125, and you're using a vessel like the Delta Glider or XR2, you can basically wait all the way up until the time that you're at apoapsis within 1 or 2 seconds to start your burn. But when you're dealing with these much larger burns, the ideal timing for that becomes more, it's something you need to do. If you want to do it properly, you need to apply a little bit more math, and that's not something I can do off the top of my head by any means. So it helps to set up maneuvers for that, or use burn time calculator. That'll work too. But we'll do a maneuver. Get in a little closer. We're still more than a whole day out. Alright, let's go ahead and set up that maneuver. View the encounter on that side. And turn maneuver mode on. First thing we have to do is go to the date. And the PE MJD, that's the periapsis. That's when we're going to do the burn. So let's bump the date forward to that time, 57190.6672. About right there. And of course, deceleration burns are negative prograde. Okay, now looking at the hypothetical PED, you can see it started counting down right there, which means this is the point where the orbit should basically be circular. But what I'll do now is go to super, and now I'll advance this up until this number stops counting up, because this is basically the point where, you know, we've established our circular orbit. So right there it stopped counting up. Now I'll go to ultra and just go backwards to just fine tune it, but basically we're looking at 4,800 worth of delta V. And again, I do not know how to translate that into fuel, unfortunately. Although somebody did bring up an interesting point in one of my in one of the comments on my first video. So let's see if I can remember what it was he said. So basically, if we use burn time calculator and we've got time to periapsis, that's when we want to do the burn. If we hit circular, then I guess down here somewhere it tells you how much fuel you're going to use. Yeah, okay. I've seen this before. Basically, here is what the vehicle weighs right now. And this is what the vehicle will weigh after the burn is done. And this is what the vehicle would weigh if there was no fuel. So if this number is less than that number, then it means you did not have enough fuel for the burn. But you can see here, this number says after the burn's done, we would have a we would have a mass of this, and since that number is more than that number, then we do have enough fuel for the burn. I don't know if there's any more precision here with that, but that basically tells you that you do in fact have enough fuel for the burn. Alright, let me reset burn time calculator since I'm not actually using that for this. Okay, so we basically have the maneuver set up. I do want to see though if I can add in never mind, I was going to say see if I can add in any plane change, but I don't want to do that because I've already used a line plane to basically get perfectly in plane with Europa. So I'm just going to do the retrograde burn and then plan on doing a rendezvous. Now, in theory, it might be better to start setting up the moon now, but basically the moon, Europa orbits, somewhere down here, and I'm going to be orbiting up here when it's done. So my thinking is to just first do the big burn that's going to get me in orbit around Jupiter, and that will slow me down. That's actually the main reason I'm doing it this way. I'm gonna slow down a lot when I do this burn. So then when I do the rendezvous to get to the Europa, my encounter at Europa will be at a much lower velocity. Makes sense? Whereas in the first two videos, I was trying to set up the encounter with the moon as part of my sling around Jupiter, and I don't necessarily think that doing it this way will really maybe save any fuel. It might, I'm not sure, but at the very least it makes it easier because I'm going to be going much slower at this point, and then I have all the time in the world to set up the encounter. Hopefully that makes sense. So I am happy basically with this. Let me just see if there's any fine-tuning I can do or want to do. Yeah, this works for me. So VW, and we're quite a ways out from the time to do the burn, so I'm going to warp time ahead till I'm much closer, and then I will check the maneuver to see if I'm still happy with it. Alright, warping time forward. Okay, we're at 10,000 seconds now. So let me just quickly check how things look. And just take a quick look outside. Okay. And let's go retrograde because we're not too far away from the time to do the burn. And you can also see that our orbital speed here is close to 15,000, or rather 15 kilometers per second. So we're, what is that, about half, this close to half as fast as we were going in the first video. I think it was closer to 27 kilometers. Okay. Just warping time ahead here. Okay, we're only about 1,000 seconds out. Let's take one final look at the encounter. Still looking good. Just out of curiosity, let's see. Yeah, we're still in good plane with Europa. Alright. Alright, let's go ahead and commit to this burn now. Get rotated. Burning in 20 seconds. Let's speed that up a little bit. 3, 2, 1, and there we are. This is not going to be useful to look at. Let's bring up orbit MFD on that side. That'll be more useful. I'm going to have to leave this view up here, obviously, because I need to be able to follow the burn. And let's bring up, let's see if map is useful. Nah, nothing interesting to look at there. Or we just burned through another fuel module. Maybe surface has a lot of interesting information, I suppose. So we're just going to keep an eye on the burn, the green X. We can take a look outside for a moment. Just burn through another fuel module. See if I can make a thumbnail for the video while I'm sitting here doing this. Turn off that information. Let me see. Yeah, I'll do it later. But at any rate, you can see what's going on here. Our orbital path around Jupiter goes this way, so we're burning opposite that direction, which means we're slowing ourselves down, lowering our orbit around Jupiter. And if we press F9, you can see Io, Europa, Ganymede, Saturn. This is the ecliptic, the sun's ecliptic. And there's Callisto. There's Mars way out there. Neptune. Venus and Earth. Alright. Jump back inside. You can see here in orbit MFD we've been captured, at least for a little while here. Our eccentricity is 0.7. Everything's going pretty well. I'm going to go ahead and warp time ahead to speed up through this burn a little more quickly. Let me turn that display back on. You hear those fuel modules burning out. Not too far away from the end of the burn. Let's go back to real time. Let's begin backing off the engines. Oops.
Translation.
Okay, I'm happy with that. Very much so. Okay, maneuver mode's off. So you can see what we have. We are here. Europa's there. We're in a very circular orbit around Jupiter and above Europa. So very simple maneuver to bring our orbit down so that it matches Europa. And in order to do that, we're just going to set up a TransX maneuver. And again, I just think by separating it into two separate phases, it's at least easier, maybe even more fuel efficient. That part I'm not 100% sure of. I think it either, my guess is that it's either very close to being indifferent or it is exactly the same. I'm going to set that aside for a moment. I'm going to jettison these empty modules. That will lighten the XR5 quite a bit more. And by having a lighter, less massive vessel, then each subsequent burn will require less fuel. So let's turn the APU on. Let's open the bay doors. Turn the APU off to get rid of the noise. And let's go through and toss out the used modules. That's spent.
Payload deployed.
I really wish the programming didn't do this, where when you deploy a module,
Payload deployed.
it defaults to this. I mean, what is this? Why does it default up here? It doesn't make sense to me.
Payload deployed. Payload deployed. Payload deployed.
It looks like all these are spent. Yeah. So 21.
Payload deployed. Payload deployed. Payload deployed. Payload deployed. Payload deployed. Payload deployed.
It's got fuel in it. Okay. And this one's almost empty, but... oh wait, that's actually a LOX module, never mind. Okay, and we'll press F1 to look outside. Warp time ahead for a moment to let those float away a little bit. You can see now they're clear of the vessel. And those are now satellites of Jupiter, I suppose. I suppose eventually their orbits will get perturbed and they'll get drawn in and burn up in Jupiter's atmosphere someday. Okay, APU on. Close the bay doors. APU off. Okay, so we still have all the fuel in the main tank, plus we still have a little bit more fuel in the in a couple of modules, couple of payload. So I don't think we will have any problem whatsoever getting rendezvoused with Europa. I cannot possibly imagine how that wouldn't work at this point. So we're doing very well. It looks like third time's the charm on this learn with me, but don't let me speak too soon. I think this makes for a good stopping point. We are now all the way out to Jupiter. We've got our orbit established, got rid of the extra weight, so let me go ahead and end the video at this point, and we'll pick it up in the next part. If you have any questions about anything that I did here, go ahead and leave those questions down below, and I try to definitely respond to any questions that are posed to me. If you have any suggestions, any advice, if you saw anything that I did that didn't make sense or that you think would be better if I had done something else, please let me know. I'm always interested in constructive criticism. Otherwise, if you liked the video, leave a comment down below, let me know what you thought, and we'll see you in the next part.